Hello my friends, in today's video we're gonna talk about unschooling. Many of you asked me about unschooling, homeschooling, what my views are on that in regards to Mika, and in today's video I'm gonna tackle your questions. First of all, there is a difference between homeschooling, unschooling, and radical unschooling. Apparently there are different terminology that it's used, and homeschooling is very much like school, but you are doing it at home. So there is still structure, there is still curriculum you're following, there is still involvement, parental involvement that it's probably heavier than for unschooling. Whereas unschooling as a term stands for totally taking your children out of traditional education, being involved in providing them favorable environment, but do not create a schedule for them. So it is very much self-driven, child-led exploration and learning. In that sense, unschooling disagrees with the homeschooling agenda, which says it's very similar to traditional education. You're just transferring the location from outside environment to home environment, whereas the idea of the unschooling is to work with the natural interest of the child. The proponents of the unschooling, who are the followers of so-called the father of the unschooling, who created and coined this term back in the 70s, his name is John Holt. According to them, the best way for children to learn is through play and exploration. And everybody knows, I'm sure that everybody would agree, that children are natural learners. Children love learning. They were born with human tendencies that involve exploration and learning, and in time we sometimes interfere with their process of natural learning by exercising coercion, by forcing them to do something which we think we know better for them. The unschooling and homeschooling are growing in the US, in Canada, in even European countries like France, in the UK. In the UK, according to statistics, there were an increase of 40% in only 3 years for children who were homeschooled, which is a significant amount of number considering that in Europe it's not as popular as it is in North America. And unfortunately, the reason why people choose to do unschooling in the UK seems to be more in regards to mental health, or that children have problems at school and they're not part of inclusion. In the US, there is more tradition in regards to that. I personally remember 15 years ago, or more than that, 20 years ago, when I was still in Bulgaria and working for an American company, there was one of our partners from the US who came and told us about unschooling his 3 children. And at the time, with my mindset, I couldn't believe that this is even possible, because for me, school is the place where you meet friends, where you learn things, and the place where you learn how to socialize. And for me, it was really important to get out of the house as well. So I couldn't imagine how I can be staying at home and learning at home with my siblings rather than being out. Now, many of you ask me what are my personal views about unschooling. Nowadays, they're very different than years ago. Actually, I believe in unschooling. I think it's a great way and it could be very beneficial for the child. Why didn't I choose it for Mika? I considered it at the time, even when he was 2 years old and not at all ready for nursery or school. And I researched at the time different things, and still I may research it in the future. Have I found the school that Mika goes now, which I really like. Probably I would have unschooled him, or I would have found alternative to traditional schooling. The reason why I like it, apart from the benefits that we can talk about, is that I don't really believe in the traditional educational system. I think that it's failing our children. I think that even when we were children, it didn't prepare us for real life. It didn't give us practical skills. It put us in a box and it labeled us. Focus is very much on results and how would you do on standardized tests than on the journey itself, which is so much more important for the overall development of the child. Also, the school environment, for me, it's very artificially created. So you are together in a classroom with 25 or 30 other children, and everybody's expected to be at the same pace. So there is no really individuality. You don't really study with a certain child, and we don't give them different approach just because they're different. So there is the average, and there are children who are labeled as better or worse or slower learners. And again, I don't think that that prepares children, especially for nowadays, when many of the jobs that we thought that would exist are not going to exist anymore, and our children definitely are going to work and live in a different world where they have to be able to use other skills like problem solving and public speaking and thinkers and being able to communicate better. And these are not things that I see the current school, traditional educational system does for our children. So that's the first reason. I just don't believe in the traditional educational system and the way it's being applied in, at least in where I live, where children start school very early. The second thing is that I truly believe that children love learning. I really like many of the benefits that an unschooling environment can provide for a child. For example, it is based on their own interest. A child learns so much better when they follow their own interest instead of being told what they need to do. Then there is this human tendency of children when they're born for exploration, and they're motivated, they're self-driven and motivated to do things, and homeschooling uses that. When you go to traditional education, usually there is preference to certain subjects that somehow the society decided are better than other subjects, such as science or mathematics and literacy, versus expressive art and design, music, education. And when you have a child who is at home ready to learn, following their own pace, not being judged, not being labeled, and not being focused on standardized tests, you are saving a lot of the anxieties that they face at school. For me, as a Montessorian as well, I can see lots of similarities between the Montessori approach and the unschooling based on the John Holt, based on the father of the unschooling and the way he saw the unschooling. And it's basically based on respect. So there is huge respect to the individuality of your child and their own preferences. And there is huge trust. So you have to trust that your child is self-motivated, that they would embrace learning because that's what they naturally do, and that they will be they'll develop in their own pace for good. It's really, really, really hard for us to do that because we were brought up thinking, okay, but what if they don't follow a schedule? And maybe they won't follow a schedule later. No, that's not the case. There are many, many benefits from unschooling, and I personally know a lot of my friends in the US who are unschooling their children. So that's it, that's my opinion. I really like it. I would have explored it had I found the school that I really like for Mika now, which is a bit different. He doesn't have assessments. There is no such a focus on how do they do. There is still structure, and you know, I need to make up my mind about it because I want him to like it. But at the same time, they are working more on problem-solving skills, public speaking skills, and more in inquiry. So how can we inquire and resolve our own problems, which I like so far. And he's in a smaller class group. That said, probably I'm the only mom who goes there in any parents meeting and keep asking his teachers, could you please not push him? I don't want him to be pushed. I want him to be happy. I want him to be joyful. He loves learning. So yeah, I'm happy so far. And in the UK, it's not as easy to homeschool. Of course, you can find communities and groups, and now homeschooling or unschooling, it's so much more easier than it used to be before. There are certain myths around it in the sense of that maybe if you're an unschooled child, you don't do well going to college or universities. That's not true. In fact, a bigger proportion of children who have been unschooled get into colleges versus children who come from traditional education. And also there is this myth that they don't know how to follow schedule. Again, that's not true. Of course, they go to different classes and groups, and being self-driven helped them find the schedule that works for them best. So in today's video, I'm not going to talk about how to do unschooling, because if you get to this point, you'll know, but I can tell you how to approach it, or how would I have approached it how would approach it if I want to do that with Mika. So the first thing to do is to make sure you know your why. Why do you want to take your child out of traditional education, or not to even try the traditional educational system? And there could be many reasons for that. It could be that you don't trust the traditional education system like I do, or it's location-wise where you live and there is no the school that you want your child to be there, or you have a poor experience with school. So many of my friends who unschool their children actually felt in this group. They were not happy with the school, traditional school education, or how their children felt at school. When you know your why, that would help you as well to figure out, is this the best thing for my child? And especially this is relevant for people who have 2 or 3 children. So with one child, it's in a way it's easier, but in a way it's harder, because then it would be harder for me to unschool Mika without any children around. But when you have 3 children or 2 children, 4 children, they have different interests. So some children can do really well at school and prefer to be there. Other children may prefer to be homeschooled. So it could be hard for parents to decide, you know, how do they split their time, and can they send one child to school and the other at school? So you have to take many other things into consideration. Then it's about which approach are you following. Do you still want to have a schedule, curriculum that you follow, which means you're homeschooling, or you really want to trust your child? People say that if you take your child out of school, you have to give them time to de-school themselves. It means that you literally have to give them a month to forget about schedules, getting up on time, or thinking about learning something. So it needs to be time for them to just be versus doing things and learning things. If you never send your child, then it's a different thing. You just do whatever you've been doing so far. There is this notion that children are now 5 years old and now, or they're 7 years old if they're in Europe, most European countries, or they are 4 years old if they're in the UK, and now they have to formally be taught something. They have to sit down and somebody is pouring knowledge in their heads. Until yesterday, and in most countries 5 years old, even now, they're still in kindergarten or in a nursery, so they pre-kindergarten age. So what they do is play, explore, sleep, be happy. That's what you continue doing with your children if you decide not to send them to traditional school education. However, you have to create favorable environment. Favorable environment means that you have to be there offering help when they need it, providing resources, trainings, researching classes. If your child is interested in something, then you have to take the time to take them to, let's say, a farm, so that they can see the cows and probably milk a cow, or take them to a pottery class so they see how they're done. A lot of unschoolers say that their children learn more by practical things, and in fact, a child who goes to school, like Mika, he's between 8:30 and 3:30 at school. What is he doing for so many hours? You know, if he wants to learn something, the idea is that you can stay at home and only in an hour time learn as much as other children are learning outside of school. So know your why, it will help you during hard times, know the personality of your child, make sure you create very favorable environment for your child so that they need to be able to exercise their love for learning and motivation. Most importantly, trust. I think that that's the hardest things to do for us as parents, because we tend to think we know better than a child. So trust is huge. You have to trust that the child has the ability, motivation, and inner desire to learn by themselves. And let go, which means consciously all the time reminding yourself, I have the school mindset, I have the school mindset. You know, my decision now is different, so I need to see how I'm doing it. From now on then, once you're ready to do all these things, you can do your research and decide what works for you. In some countries, it's illegal, or if you take them out, you have to still pass exams every year, so that with the Department of Education. Other countries, like in the US, it's legal in most states, if not all states. In the UK it's legal too, so it depends on where you live. You have to check what you want to do, and there are so many resources. Unschooling 30 years ago would have been probably much harder, but now there are websites, there are lots of resources for parents, how to learn themselves. There is this myth that they should be able to know everything for every subject. That's not true. And there are lots of communities as well, Facebook communities, meetups. So if you don't have any, you can create your own. So yeah, if you decide to do that, I wish you good luck, guys. If you decide to do unschooling or homeschooling, I would love if you can leave me comments if you have any positive or negative experience with this schooling or unschooling. One of the main, people say myths when they've been through the process. I personally don't know yet. I tend to think that that's not true, but at the same time, part of me still thinks that school provides socialization. A lot of people say that if you're unschooled, you're lacking social skills, because then being at school, you're resolving conflicts between you and your peers, and you talk to adults. Other people who do unschooling, they say actually it's the opposite. Your child has so many opportunities to interact with people from different backgrounds, with adults, because they travel to see different places, they go to museums, and that the school actually creates a very artificial peer environment. Everybody in your class, it's more or less like you, let's face it. You know, depending on which school you are, most of the parents are from the same demographics, most of the children are the same demographics, so it's not really that helpful from socializing perspective. There are people, if you read forums, who have been unschooled and they say, yes, it impaired my social skills, and many others who say, oh my God, that's the best thing, and I've always been self-directed and I've always loved learning. So again, depends on the personality of your child, depends on how you treat them at home, depends on how much you respect their individuality and pace, and depends on how much, what a favorable environment you create, and for many other things, I'm sure. But you know, it's a decision that it's not to be taken with light heart, but also not to be taken as seriously, because you can always go back to what you know. You can always send them to school. So that's it from me. I hope this video helped you, and if so, please give it a like and subscribe for my channel. And I hope I'll see you soon, friends. And please let me know what are your thoughts about schooling, unschooling, or anything else you want to share with me. Thank you so much. See you.